Welcome. There is a specific kind of silence that is different from all other silences. It is the silence that follows the last transmission. The moment when the radio frequency goes quiet and stays quiet. When the operators on the surface keep their headsets on and listen and hear nothing and begin to understand that nothing is what they are going to continue to hear. It is a silence with weight and direction. It presses in from all sides. It does not resolve. Tonight we descend into that silence, into the world of the submarine, and into the stories of the boats that went down and did not come back up. More than 50 submarines have been lost since the first of them went to war. Some were sunk in combat, which carries its own terrible arithmetic. But some were lost in peacetime, in training on routine patrols. Lost to causes that took years to investigate, and in some cases were never resolved. Lost in water so deep that the wrecks were not found for months or years or decades, and in a few cases have still not been found at all. This is not just a journey into mechanical failure or Cold War secrecy, or the physics of depth. It is a journey into what it means for a ship to disappear, for a crew to be unreachable, for the ocean to take something and keep it, into the silence that follows the last transmission and what we find when we finally go looking. If you find this slow, quiet exploration of mystery something you genuinely enjoy, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe. Letting me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you is always a quiet comfort. Now find your comfortable position. Dim the lights. Take a slow breath. We are leaving the map behind. The ocean has always been indifferent to the vessels that move through it. It does not distinguish between warships and merchant ships, between submarines and surface craft, between the ships of nations at war and the ships of nations at peace. It applies the same pressure, the same cold, the same absolute darkness to all of them equally. What makes the submarine different is that it was designed to go there. It was designed to go deep, to hide in the darkness, to use the pressure and the cold and the silence as cover. The ocean is not the submarine's enemy. It is the submarine's environment. And sometimes, in ways that are still being understood, it becomes the submarine's grave. We are going down tonight into that darkness, one story at a time, slowly, carefully, the way the ocean requires. Not every disappearance at sea is a mystery. Some submarines are sunk in battle, and war provides a brutal accounting. The attacker knows what they did, the Navy knows what it lost, and the wreck can eventually be found and identified. But the submarines in tonight's story are different. They were lost in peacetime, on routine operations, in some cases without any warning and without any clear cause. The silence that followed their disappearances was not the silence of acknowledged loss. It was the silence of not knowing, of search grids expanding and finding nothing, of official statements that gave families less information than they deserved. To understand what it means for a submarine to be lost, you first need to understand what a submarine is. Not technically, but experientially. What it is like to be inside one. A submarine is a steel cylinder, sealed from the outside world, designed to operate in an environment that will kill everything inside it if the hull fails. The pressure hull of a modern nuclear submarine is between 3 and 5 centimeters thick. Inside it, a crew of anywhere from 60 to 150 men live and work in a space roughly comparable to a narrow apartment building laid on its side. The hull is perhaps 6 to 10 meters in diameter and 100 meters long. There are no windows. There is no horizon. There is no day or night except the artificial cycles imposed by the ship's schedule. Every surface is functional. The bunks are arranged in tiers because there is no room for them to be arranged otherwise. The mess is also a recreation space, a meeting room, and a passageway to other parts of the boat. The machinery spaces are so loud that hearing protection is required. The control room, where the submarine is driven, is a space of consoles and gauges and periscopes and plotting tables, in which a dozen men stand within arm's reach of each other. The air is recycled. The water is produced on board. The food is brought in before departure and must last the duration of the patrol, which on a nuclear submarine can be 3 months. The crew does not see sunlight for weeks at a time. They surface only when necessary. Their world is the interior of the hull, the hum of the reactor, the sound of water moving past the steel on the outside. When everything works, this world is self-contained and functional. The crew adapts. They learn to navigate the tight spaces, to read the sounds the boat makes, to distinguish normal sounds from abnormal ones. A submarine crew develops an intimate familiarity with their vessel, because their vessel is the only environment available to them. When something goes wrong inside that environment, the crew has very few places to go. There is no deck to evacuate to. There is no lifeboat in the conventional sense. There is the interior of the hull, the escape systems built into it, and the distance from the surface to wherever the boat has gone. For most of the submarines that have been lost, that distance was too great. The escape systems, where they existed, could not operate at depth. The surface could not reach the crew. The crew could not reach the surface. The silence that followed was not radio silence. It was the silence of the ocean taking something in and closing around it. What surfaces people often do not know or do not think about is what the submarine feels like to the men inside when everything is normal. Not in an emergency, on an ordinary day at sea. The noise level in the machinery spaces requires hearing protection because the pumps and the reactor systems and the propulsion equipment run continuously. The control room, by contrast, is relatively quiet. The sonar operators sit at their displays and listen through headphones to the sounds the ocean makes around them. They learn what sounds the ship makes under normal conditions, and they notice when those sounds change. A change in the noise signature of the reactor system, a vibration from the propeller shaft that was not there the day before, an unusual sound from the torpedo room. These are the signals that experienced crew members notice and report. In the submarines that have been lost, something was noticed, or should have been, and then there was no time to act on it. Pressure is the organizing fact of the submarine's existence. Everything about a submarine is a negotiation with pressure. How much the hull can withstand, at what depth the systems begin to fail, at what depth the hull itself will fail. This depth is called the crush depth, and it is the figure that defines the outer boundary of the submarine's world. Water pressure increases by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. At the surface, pressure is 1 atmosphere. At 100 meters, it is 11 atmospheres. At 300 meters, it is 31 atmospheres. At 600 meters, it is 61 atmospheres. Each atmosphere of pressure is equivalent to roughly 1 kilogram of weight, pressing on every square centimeter of surface area. At the depth where most submarine disasters occur, the pressure on the hull is equivalent to dozens of tons bearing down on every square meter of steel. The hull is designed to withstand this. The design has safety margins built in, but the safety margins are not infinite, and they depend on every weld, every fitting, every valve, every seal performing exactly as designed. A submarine hull is a system of interdependent components. A failure in one component under pressure can propagate faster than any crew can respond. The physics of what happens when a pressure hull fails at depth has been studied from the wreckage of lost submarines. At great depth, the failure is not an explosion, it is an implosion. The pressure outside the hull, which is constant and enormous, drives inward through any breach. The air inside, which is at surface pressure, is compressed instantaneously. The crew does not have time to register what is happening. The entire event takes milliseconds. The water that enters a breached submarine hull at crushed depth does not flow. It does not flood the way a flood is usually imagined. It strikes. The pressure differential between the outside and the inside is so great that water enters at speeds that are effectively ballistic. Anything in its path is not submerged. It is impacted. What reaches the seafloor after this event is not the submarine as it was. The pressure collapse compresses the structure. The hull sections fold. Some components survive intact because they were themselves pressure vessels. Others are reduced to fragments distributed across a debris field that can span hundreds of meters. This is what the crews of lost submarines encountered in their final seconds. And it is what the search teams found when they eventually located the wrecks. Not ships on the seafloor, but the scattered evidence of what pressure does when it finally wins. There is a specific depth, different for every submarine design, called the test depth. Below it lies the collapse depth, deeper by a margin that designers calculate based on hull, material strength and manufacturing tolerances. A submarine at test depth is within its designed envelope. Below that, the safety margin thins. What the catastrophic failures in submarine history have shown is that crush depth is not a precise number. Where within the calculated range a particular hull fails depends on factors that cannot be fully predicted. The uniformity of the welds, the precise thickness of the steel at every point, the condition of every valve under sustained pressure. The ocean applies its pressure without exception. If the hull has a weakness the designers did not account for, the ocean will find it. The morning of April the 10th, 1963, the USS Thresher departed for deep diving tests in the North Atlantic. The site was about 350 kilometers east of Cape Cod. She was the lead vessel of a new class of nuclear attack submarines, the most advanced submarine in the world at the time of her commissioning 2 years earlier. She carried a crew of 112 men and had 16 civilian contractors and technicians aboard to monitor equipment during the tests. The Thresher was accompanied by the rescue vessel Skylark, which maintained communication by underwater telephone while the submarine conducted its tests. The plan was for Thresher to dive in stages, pausing at depth to check systems before going deeper. The tests were standard procedure. The submarine had conducted similar tests before. The crew was experienced, the boat was new, and had recently completed post-overhaul checks. At approximately 9 minutes past 9 in the morning, Skylark received an underwater telephone transmission from Thresher. The transmission was fragmented and difficult to understand. Some words were audible, others were not. What could be made out suggested the submarine was experiencing difficulties with the propulsion system and might be trying to ascend. The final intelligible words received by Skylark were something along the lines of attempting to blow ballast, followed by fragmented sounds that the crew of Skylark could not decipher. Then silence. Skylark attempted to re-establish contact. The frequency stayed quiet. After several hours of failed contact attempts, a search of the area was initiated. Debris began appearing on the surface. Bits of cork insulation, yellow rubber gloves, oil. The sea gave back what it always gives back when something has gone down. The light things, everything heavy, remained below. The Thresher had gone down in more than 2,000 meters of water. She had descended to crush depth and beyond. The entire event, from the first indication of trouble to the final silence, had lasted a matter of minutes. 129 men were on board. None survived. They were the first American nuclear submariners lost at sea, and their deaths would change how submarines were built for generations afterward. But none of that was known on the morning of April 10th, 1963. When the ocean went quiet and the Skylark kept listening to a frequency that would not speak again. The morning had been unremarkable. The sea state was normal. The weather was not a factor. The Thresher had been operating within her tested parameters. She was on schedule, conducting a test profile that had been planned and reviewed and approved. The commanding officer and crew were experienced. There was nothing to suggest this dive would be different from any other. This is part of what makes the Thresher's loss so disorienting to read about. It happened on an ordinary day during a routine test, and the transition from ordinary to catastrophic was so fast that the crew had time only to report what was happening, not to stop it. The underwater telephone transmissions received by Skylark carry no sense of panic, which is perhaps the most disturbing thing about them. The crew was trained for emergencies. They were following procedures. The procedures were not enough. The wreck of the Thresher was located in the weeks and months that followed. The Bathyscaphe Trieste, the same vessel that had reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench 3 years earlier, descended to photograph the site. What it found was not a submarine. It was a debris field. The collapse of the hull at crushed depth had distributed the Thresher across the ocean floor in a pattern that told investigators something about how she had died. The debris field was roughly 500 meters in diameter. Heavy machinery that had been bolted to the hull was separate from the hull sections themselves. Items that had been sealed in pressure vessels were intact. Items that had not were destroyed. The Trieste's photographs were methodically catalogued and brought to the surface inquiry. The inquiry reached a probable cause, though not a certain one. The most likely sequence was this. A seawater pipe in the engine room had failed, spraying water into the electrical system. This caused a reactor shutdown. Without propulsion, the submarine could not maintain its depth or ascend under power. The crew attempted to blow the ballast tanks with high-pressure air, which is the standard emergency procedure for bringing a submarine to the surface rapidly. The blow system may have failed, or the air may have frozen as it expanded through the valves, blocking the flow. With no power and no buoyancy, the submarine descended below its crushed depth. The inquiry determined that the probable cause was a failure in the silver-brazed fittings used in seawater piping. These fittings had not been tested to the standards that the Thresher's deep diving capabilities required. The submarine had been certified for depths its own internal plumbing could not support. In the years since, the Thresher site has been visited multiple times by remotely operated vehicles. The debris is largely where it fell, slowly being buried by the sediment that drifts down from the water column above. Small sea creatures live among the fragments. The ocean is doing with the Thresher what it does with everything, taking it apart slowly, incorporating it, transforming it from a machine into a feature of the seafloor. The names of the 129 men who went down with her are on a memorial at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. The sea keeps the rest. The Bathyscaphe Trieste required multiple dives to document the site fully. The photographs were taken in complete darkness using mounted lights, and they show a seafloor scene that early viewers found difficult to interpret. The objects in the photographs do not obviously assemble into a submarine. They are components of a submarine, spread across a wide area, in the positions they came to rest in after the collapse and the descent. One of the objects photographed was a boot. It was intact, as leather at depth often is. This detail entered the public record when the inquiry documents were eventually declassified. It is the kind of detail that connects the abstract machinery of disaster to the people inside it. A boot on the seafloor, 2,000 meters down, photographed by lights, lowered from a submersible, sitting among the fragments of the most advanced submarine in the American fleet. What happened to the Thresher was not treated as an isolated event. It was treated as evidence of a systemic problem in the way American submarines were built and maintained, and the response was one of the most thorough safety overhauls in the history of naval engineering. The program was called SubSafe. It was established in 1963 in the immediate aftermath of the Thresher inquiry, and it applied to every submarine in the US Navy fleet. Its requirements were specific and demanding. Every system that was critical to maintaining watertight integrity or to surfacing the submarine in an emergency had to be designed, fabricated, tested, and documented to standards that had not previously existed. The silver-brazed fittings that may have failed in the Thresher were replaced across the fleet with welded joints. Every weld in a SubSafe critical system was required to pass radiographic testing. Records had to be maintained for every component, every test, every repair. The program created a paper trail of accountability that made it possible to follow the history of any fitting in any submarine. If a component failed, investigators could determine when it was installed, who installed it, what testing it had undergone, and whether the testing had met the required standard. If a standard had not been met, the failure could be investigated as a systemic failure rather than an individual error. The cost of implementing SubSafe was enormous. The time required to bring the fleet into compliance was measured in years. Submarine availability declined during the transition because boats were in refit, being brought up to the new standard. The Navy accepted this cost because the alternative the Thresher inquiry had made clear, was not acceptable. The sub-safe program has not guaranteed that no submarine will ever be lost again. It is not that kind of guarantee. What it has guaranteed is that if a US Navy sub-safe certified submarine is lost, the cause will not be a failure to test a weld or document a fitting. The systemic failures that killed the Thresher have been accounted for. In the 60 years since the program was established, no sub-safe certified submarine has been lost. That record is not coincidence. It is the shape of what systematic accountability looks like when applied to machines that go where light cannot follow. The sub-safe program works not by making submarines invulnerable, but by making their vulnerabilities known and accounted for. Every component critical to surviving a flooding casualty or surfacing the submarine is tracked from manufacture, through installation, through every repair. The people who worked on it are identified, the testing is documented, the standard required is recorded alongside the result achieved. This creates accountability that does not exist in most manufacturing environments, and the ability to investigate failures systematically. When a problem is found, it can be followed backward through the documentation to its origin, and the origin addressed rather than just the symptom. The loss of the Thresher created a genuine institutional understanding of what the alternative looks like, and that understanding has been passed from one generation of naval officers to the next. It has held. 5 years after the Thresher, the US Navy lost a second nuclear submarine. The USS Scorpion disappeared in the North Atlantic in May of 1968. She was returning from a Mediterranean deployment when contact was lost. 99 men were on board. None survived. The Scorpion presented a different and more troubling mystery than the Thresher. The Thresher had been on a controlled deep-diving test when she was lost. The circumstances of her final minutes, though tragic, were relatively well understood. The Scorpion disappeared in open ocean, on a routine transit, under circumstances that were never definitively determined. The submarine was found 5 months after her loss by a search team led by the oceanographer Robert Ballard, using a network of underwater listening devices that had originally been deployed to detect Soviet submarine activity. The wreck was located in more than 3,000 meters of water, roughly 700 kilometers southwest of the Azores. The debris field was analyzed and a naval court of inquiry was convened. The inquiry examined every theory available to it and reached a conclusion it described as unknown. The most extensively investigated theory holds that a faulty torpedo was the cause. The Scorpion had on board a type of torpedo known to have problems with its battery system. Under certain conditions, this battery could ignite and cause the torpedo to arm and run in its storage tube. A running torpedo in a closed tube generates enough heat and pressure to rupture the tube and flood the torpedo room. The flooding would then propagate through the ship. Other theories have been advanced, including the possibility that the Scorpion encountered a Soviet vessel and was sunk in an undeclared engagement. This theory has found no supporting evidence. The Soviet Navy lost its own submarine, the K-129, in the Pacific in the same year, and the circumstantial proximity of the two losses has generated speculation that has never been confirmed. What remains is the mystery. The Scorpion's wreck is on the seafloor. The inquiry is complete. The cause is officially unknown. 99 men went down with her into water so deep that no human will ever stand beside the place where they came to rest. The Scorpion has attracted more alternative theories than almost any other lost submarine. The official cause is unknown, which leaves room for alternatives in a way that the Thresher's more resolved inquiry does not. And 1968 was a year of extraordinary Cold War tension, in which the overlap between military accidents and military operations was a genuine possibility. The Navy's investigation into the Scorpion remains classified to a significant degree. Researchers who have obtained partially declassified versions note that certain sections were removed before release. What can be said is that 99 men went to sea and did not come back, and the official inquiry concluded that the cause was probably a faulty torpedo, and that this conclusion was not certain. The ocean holds the Scorpion's secret as it holds all its secrets, without any obvious intention of giving it up. The same year the Scorpion disappeared, the Soviet Navy lost a submarine in the Pacific. The K-129 was a Golf II class ballistic missile submarine carrying nuclear weapons. She was on patrol when she went down in March of 1968, roughly 3,000 kilometers northwest of Hawaii. 198 men were on board. None survived. The Soviets conducted a search of the area, but did not find the wreck. The US Navy, using its network of underwater hydrophones, had detected what appeared to be an explosion in the Pacific at roughly the time and location where the K-129 would have been on patrol. The hydrophone data gave US Navy analysts a search area. They searched it quietly, without announcing what they were doing. They found the wreck at a depth of more than 5,000 meters. What the US government then did with this knowledge is one of the more extraordinary operations of the Cold War. The Central Intelligence Agency, in coordination with the US Navy and with the participation of the billionaire industrialist Howard Hughes as a cover story, designed and built a specialized deep-sea mining vessel called the Glomar Explorer. The stated purpose of the Glomar Explorer was deep-sea manganese nodule mining. The actual purpose was the recovery of the K-129 from the ocean floor. The operation, called Project Azorian, deployed the Glomar Explorer to the site of the K-129 in 1974, using a mechanical claw system lowered from the ship on a pipe string thousands of meters long. The recovery team attempted to lift the Soviet submarine from the seafloor. During the lift, a structural failure in the claw caused part of the submarine to break away and fall back to the bottom. What was successfully recovered included portions of the submarine, cryptographic equipment, and the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. Those 6 men were buried at sea with full naval honors. The ceremony was conducted in secret, filmed, and the film was later turned over to the Russian government after the Cold War ended. The rest of the K-129 remains where it fell. The US government acknowledged the existence of Project Azorian in the 1970s after a news leak. The full details of what was recovered remain classified. The Soviet government and then the Russian government were never officially told what the Glomar Explorer found. Project Azorian represents the furthest the Cold War competition extended into the deep ocean. The 2 superpowers were using the ocean floor as a site of strategic intelligence, a place where things could be lost and found and kept secret from the other side. The Glomar Explorer's cover story was convincing enough that it operated in the Pacific for weeks without detection. The vessel was real, the mining equipment was real, and the ocean was deep enough that what happened 3 miles below the surface was effectively invisible from above. The phrase that the US government will neither confirm nor deny the existence or possession of nuclear weapons aboard vessels became standard US policy, partly as a result of Project Azorian and the questions it raised about what had been recovered from the K-129. The ocean, in this sense, produced a diplomatic formula as well as an intelligence operation. Among the Soviet submarine losses, one stands apart for the particular quality of its tragedy. The K-278 Komsomolets was a titanium-hulled submarine, the deepest diving military submarine ever built, designed to operate at depths where no weapon of the time could reach it. On April 7th, 1989, she caught fire in the Norwegian Sea. The fire started in the aft compartments and spread through ventilation ducts faster than the crew could control it. The submarine surfaced. The crew sent distress signals. Some men escaped from the stricken boat onto life rafts in water that was approximately 2 degrees Celsius above freezing. The cold water was lethal within minutes. Rescue aircraft and ships were on their way, but the distances involved in the Norwegian Sea meant they would not arrive in time for everyone. 42 of the 69 men aboard died. Some died in the fire. Some died when the submarine sank, and they were pulled down with it. Most who died on the surface died of hypothermia in the water, within sight of rescue vessels that arrived minutes too late. What makes the Komsomolets distinctive is that several of the crew escaped from the submarine after it sank, using an escape pod. The pod surfaced. It contained 4 men. By the time it was reached, only one was alive. The others had suffocated when the pod's hatch mechanism failed to seal properly and water entered. The Komsomolets sank in approximately 1,700 meters of water in the Norwegian Sea, where she remains today. Her reactor and the 2 nuclear torpedoes she carried are still aboard. Norwegian and Russian scientists have periodically monitored the wreck for signs of radioactive leakage. Low levels of radioactive cesium have been detected near the wreck site. The reactor has not been removed. The torpedoes have not been removed. The Norwegian Sea continues to cover them, as it covers everything else. The Komsomolets was the most capable submarine the Soviet Union ever built. She was capable of diving deeper than any navy could pursue her. She sank in 900 meters. The fire that killed her had nothing to do with depth. The Komsomolets disaster illustrates a specific kind of tragedy that recurs in the history of submarine losses. The disaster that happens in stages, with time between each stage, and in which decisions made in each interval affect what happens in the next. The fire did not immediately sink the submarine. The submarine surfaced. There was time. The crew had procedures to follow, and followed them. The rescue assets that existed were eventually dispatched, but the Norwegian Sea is a large and cold body of water, and the distance between the nearest coast and a stricken submarine is not abstract. It is minutes of survival time in 2-degree water. The gap between when the Komsomolets sent her distress signal and when rescue reached the area was filled with deaths that a faster response might have prevented, or might not have. We cannot know because the faster response did not come. The submarine had been designed to survive at depths where no weapon could pursue her. She had a double hull and titanium construction and operational capabilities that made her, on paper, one of the safest submarines ever built against external threats. The threat that killed her came from inside, from a fire that moved faster than the procedures were written to handle. The most advanced submarine the Soviet Union ever built sank because of a fire. This is the kind of irony that the ocean does not register as irony. It simply registers as physics. The submarine disaster that the world watched happen in real time occurred in August of 2000. The Russian submarine Kursk, a nuclear-powered Oscar II class cruise missile submarine, sank during naval exercises in the Barents Sea on August 12th. 118 men were on board. None survived. The Kursk was one of the largest and most powerful submarines in the Russian Navy. She was 154 meters long and carried 24 cruise missiles capable of striking surface ships or land targets. She had a double hull, a design intended to give her survivability that single-hull submarines lacked. She was, by any measure, a formidable and well-protected vessel. The disaster began with a torpedo. Investigators later determined that a practice torpedo had a faulty sealing mechanism in its fuel system, allowing highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide to leak onto a kerosene-based fuel. The resulting chemical reaction caused a fire and then an explosion within the torpedo tube. The first explosion was powerful enough to blow open the torpedo tube doors and destroy the forward compartments of the submarine. 2 minutes and 15 seconds later, the torpedo warheads detonated. This second explosion registered on seismographs across northern Europe. Its force was equivalent to several tons of high explosive going off inside the submarine's forward section. The bow of the submarine was destroyed. The submarine sank to the bottom of the Barents Sea in 108 meters of water. This depth is relevant. 108 meters is shallow by the standards of submarine accidents. It is within the range of divers and rescue vessels. It is shallow enough that rescue should have been possible, if rescue had come quickly enough, and if the Russian Navy had been willing to accept help. Neither of those conditions was met. In the aft compartments of the Kursk, the men who had survived the explosions were still alive. They moved to compartment 9, the furthest from the explosions, sealed the hatches, and waited. Some of them wrote notes. The ocean pressed on the hull from outside. Inside, the men counted the air they had, and waited for a knock on the hatch. That would mean rescue had come. The Kursk had been participating in a large naval exercise, the largest the Russian Navy had conducted since the end of the Soviet Union. Surface ships and submarines were operating together in the Barents Sea, practicing the tactics of fleet engagement. The exercise was in part a demonstration of renewed Russian naval capability after difficult years in which the Navy had struggled for funding and operational readiness. The Kursk was one of the prestige assets of the fleet. She was large and capable, and represented the kind of power projection the Russian Navy wanted to demonstrate. The exercise was being observed by senior naval officers, and was expected to produce results that could be reported upward as evidence of recovery. When the Kursk went silent, the exercise was slow to register it as a catastrophe. The assumption in the early hours was that a communications failure had occurred, or that the submarine had submerged at an inconvenient time. The Kursk had gone to the bottom, and the men in compartment 9 had survived the explosion and were alive and waiting, and the surface navy above them did not yet understand that this was not a communications failure. By the time they understood, the window for the decisions that might have made a difference was narrowing, and the ocean, which had taken the Kursk without announcement and without appeal, waited with the patience that deep water has always shown toward the machines and the men that descend into it. Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov was in compartment 9 of the Kursk when he wrote his note. He wrote it in the dark, on a piece of paper, by the light of a chemical torch that would not last long. The note was found when Norwegian divers opened the hatch weeks after the submarine sank. The note described the situation in compartment 9. 23 men had gathered there after the explosions. They were alive. The air pressure was rising as the air was consumed. Kolesnikov wrote that the men were calm. He wrote that there was no chance of rescue from outside. He wrote that it was too dark to write, and then he continued writing. The note was dated. The time he recorded indicates that he was still alive more than 3 hours after the explosions that sank the Kursk. 3 hours is a long time to sit in a sealed compartment in a sunken submarine, knowing what you know and writing what you know, down in the dark, because it seems important that someone eventually read it. Other notes were found in compartment 9. They are not all public. The Russian government released some of them and withheld others. What is known is that the men in compartment 9 did not die instantly. They waited, they wrote. They experienced the passing of time in a situation that the rest of the world did not yet know was irrecoverable. The cause of death for the men in compartment 9 was not the explosion. It was a chemical reaction. The Kursk's emergency oxygen generation system used chemical cartridges, canisters of sodium perchlorate that react with iron powder to produce oxygen when ignited. One of these cartridges was exposed to seawater that had entered the compartment and reacted violently, producing intense heat and starting a fire that consumed the remaining oxygen and killed the men who had survived everything else. They could not have known this was coming. They were following the correct procedures. The system that was supposed to generate their oxygen killed them instead. Captain Lieutenant Kolesnikov was 27 years old. He had been married for 6 months. The note itself is not long. Kolesnikov wrote it on the back of a schedule that had been in his pocket. He identified himself and his rank. He listed the men in the compartment. He described the conditions: pressure rising, air declining, darkness except for the chemical torch. He wrote that he was in pain. What the note makes permanent is the fact that the men in compartment 9 were people, with names and ages and marriages. The explosion had been a mechanical event. The waiting was a human one. 23 men sat in a sealed compartment in a sunken submarine and waited for a sound that did not come, and one of them wrote down what was true in the dark. Kolesnikov's handwriting is the only document from inside that submarine after it went down. The ocean eventually gave the note back. While the men in compartment 9 were still alive, the Russian Navy was attempting to reach them. The attempts failed. The rescue submarines sent to the Kursk found the area around the escape hatch blocked by debris. The hatches themselves were warped by the explosion. The miniature submarines could not attach to the rescue hatch. The Russian government's response in the first days after the sinking has been analysed and criticised extensively in the years since. The decision that draws the most sustained scrutiny is the decision to decline offers of assistance from Norway and the United Kingdom. Both Norway and Britain had deep-sea rescue assets capable of operating in the Barents Sea. Norway's remotely operated rescue vehicle and British LR-5 rescue submarine were specifically designed for submarine rescue at those depths. Within days of the Kursk sinking, both governments offered their assistance to Russia. The Russian government declined. The official reasons given were that the situation was under control and that foreign assistance was not necessary. The unofficial reasons have been debated ever since. The Kursk carried sensitive weapon systems and classified technology. Allowing foreign vessels to operate at the site meant allowing foreign eyes to examine the wreck at close range. The calculation that the Russian government appears to have made was that the risks of disclosure outweighed the possibility of rescue. By the time Norway's rescue team was permitted to reach the site, 5 days had passed since the sinking. Norwegian divers opened the escape hatch in a matter of hours. The compartment they found had been flooded. The men were dead. This calculation, if it was made, was wrong. The men in compartment 9 were likely dead before the Norwegian team could have reached them. The families of the Kursk's crew spent 5 days watching Russian rescue attempts fail on live television, not knowing and hoping and being told everything possible was being done. They deserved better than a calculation. And the ocean, which keeps its own counsel about what was owed and to whom, gave nothing back. The families who gathered at Vidyayevo in those 5 days had no way to resolve the contradiction between official reassurance and visible failure. They could only be present, demand, insist on being seen. The mother who was sedated was Nadia Tillich. Her son was a sailor aboard the Kursk. In recordings of the moment, she is seen becoming agitated as a Navy official speaks to the assembled families. A nurse enters and injects her. She goes quiet. The official continues speaking. This moment was broadcast around the world. It became an image of what the Russian government's relationship to the Kursk families looked like. Not callous in any calculated way, but callous in a bureaucratic way, which is in some respects harder to understand because it is so ordinary. The ocean 1,000 kilometers north held 118 men and did not differentiate between the official and the mother and the syringe. It held them all without judgment, without end. In November of 2017, the Argentine submarine ARA San Juan disappeared in the South Atlantic with 44 crew members aboard. She was on a routine patrol. She sent a distress call indicating that water had entered the snorkel and caused a battery short circuit and fire. After that transmission, nothing. What followed was one of the largest international search and rescue operations in the history of submarine disasters. Vessels from more than 15 countries participated. Aircraft covered enormous areas of the South Atlantic. The search used the most advanced sonar and sensor technology available. For 9 days, while hope remained, the searches expanded and found nothing. After 9 days, the Argentine Navy announced that it had transitioned from a rescue mission to a search mission. The distinction is significant and final. A rescue mission assumes there may be survivors. A search mission does not. The San Juan was found, almost exactly 1 year later, in November of 2018, by a private American search company called Ocean Infinity that had been contracted by the Argentine government. The submarine was discovered at a depth of approximately 900 meters, roughly 500 kilometers off the Argentine coast. The wreck showed signs of an implosion. The investigation that followed determined that the likely cause was a hydrogen explosion. The battery fire reported in the final transmission had damaged the submarine's battery system. Damaged lithium batteries release hydrogen gas. In an enclosed space, hydrogen is explosive. The hydrogen ignited, and the resulting explosion caused the submarine's pressure hull to fail. The 44 crew members of the San Juan had no warning and no time. The event was instantaneous. The ocean closed over the place where the submarine had been. The families of the crew spent a year not knowing where their loved ones had gone. Some of them joined the search ships. Some of them stood on the Argentine coast and watched the horizon. The ocean gave nothing back until it chose to, and it chose its own timing, as it always does. The San Juan's final transmission was received at approximately 7:30 in the morning. The submarine reported water through the snorkel, a battery short circuit, and a fire. The transmission ended. No response followed. The crew had been at sea since October 15th, on a mission scheduled to end at Mar del Plata. They were expected. Their families were preparing to receive them. The submarine was 2 weeks from the end of a routine deployment when the snorkel took water. What the families of the 44 lived through in the year between disappearance and discovery was a suffering with no name in most languages, the suffering of not knowing whether someone is dead or alive. The search had transitioned to a recovery mission, which is the official language, for we do not expect survivors. But the wreck had not been found. The 44 were gone, but not located, leaving their families in territory that is neither grief nor hope, with no way to move until the ocean decided to give back what it had taken. Finding a submarine on the ocean floor requires knowing roughly where to look, which in turn requires knowing roughly where the submarine was when it went down. In some cases, this is known. In others, it is not. In the worst cases, the submarine went down in an area so large that searching it represents years of work, even with modern technology. The technology available for finding wrecks at depth has improved dramatically in the decades since the Thresher and Scorpion were lost. Side-scan sonar, towed at depth behind a surface vessel, can map large areas of seafloor with resolution sufficient to detect a submarine-sized object. Autonomous underwater vehicles can be programmed to search a defined area without continuous human direction. Remotely operated vehicles can inspect a located object in detail, sending video to the surface in real time. But technology cannot fully replace the need for search area data. The San Juan search covered approximately 430,000 square kilometers of the South Atlantic, using the best assets available to a 15-country coalition, and took a year to find the boat. The Scorpion was found using Cold War-era hydrophone data that gave the Navy a starting location. Without that data, the search would have been orders of magnitude harder. Some lost. Submarines have still not been found. The Israeli submarine INS Dakar disappeared in the Mediterranean in January of 1968, killing 69 crew members. She was found 31 years later. The Israeli submarine INS Leviathan's sister ship, the INS Dakar, was located in 1999 at a depth of nearly 3,000 meters. The French submarine Minerve disappeared in 1968 and was found 50 years later. The pattern across these searches is one of advancing technology, gradually conquering the ocean's resistance to disclosure. But the ocean does not yield to technology entirely. It yields on its own terms, in its own time, offering up what it chooses to offer and keeping the rest. Several Cold War-era submarines remain unlocated. The ocean has not indicated that it intends to give them up. The INS Dakar's story illustrates what the before and after of search technology looks like across 3 decades. The Dakar disappeared in January of 1968, while transiting the Mediterranean from Portsmouth to Haifa. 69 Israeli sailors were aboard. The search in 1968 used the technology of that era and failed to find her. The submarine was in nearly 3,000 meters of water, and the search area was large. In 1999, an Israeli Navy vessel using modern side-scan sonar located the wreck approximately 400 kilometers west of Alexandria. 31 years, the wreck had been there the entire time, in water that covered it entirely, in a location that a modern survey could find in days that a 1968 survey could not find in months. The technology that enables this work is not entirely the technology of detection. It is also the technology of endurance, the ability to keep assets at sea for extended periods, to process vast quantities of sonar data, to maintain a search grid over an area of hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. The San Juan search involved aircraft flying continuous patterns over the South Atlantic for weeks. The processing power required to analyze the data those aircraft generated would not have existed 2 decades earlier. The ocean does not become easier to search as technology improves. It remains the same vast dark body of water. What technology does is improve the ratio of ocean search to time invested. The ocean gives up its secrets the same way it always has, slowly, partially, and on terms that continue to include the possibility of keeping them forever. When remotely operated vehicles descend to the wrecks of lost submarines, they find something that is at once recognizable and strange. The submarine is there. The shape is preserved well enough that the type can be identified. The section names can be matched to corresponding damage. The story of the final minutes can be read in the wreckage. But the submarine is also becoming something else. The Thresher, in photographs taken decades after her loss, is covered in marine growth. The debris field around her has been partially buried by sediment. The components that fell separately from the hull sections are incorporated into the seafloor landscape. Small animals move among the fragments. The boundary between the wrecked machine and the environment it rests in is less clear than it was in the first years after the sinking. The Kursk was partially salvaged. In 2001, a Dutch company under contract to the Russian government raised the main body of the submarine from the Barents Sea using large pontoons. The bow section, which contained the most severe damage from the explosions, was left on the seafloor because raising it was judged too dangerous. The recovered sections were brought to a dry dock in Murmansk. The remains of the crew were recovered and returned to their families. The submarine was subsequently scrapped. the bow section of the Kursk remains in the Barents Sea. The K-129, the K-278 Komsomolets, the Thresher, the Scorpion, the San Juan, and the many other submarines that have been lost and not raised remain where they sank. Some are in international waters, where jurisdiction is unclear. Some are in deep water, where salvage is technically impossible. All of them are decaying gradually and at the pace that cold, deep water sets, which is very slow. The men who were aboard them are part of the seafloor now, in the truest physical sense. The ocean has taken them and begun the long process of incorporating them into itself. The sea gives nothing back that it has decided to keep. It keeps it indefinitely and in its own way, which is the only way it has ever done anything. The decision to raise the Kursk was itself remarkable. The Dutch company, Mammoet, and the salvage firm Smit were contracted for the operation. They used hydraulic cutting tools to sever the bow section, hydraulic cables threaded through the hull, and a heavy lift vessel. The operation succeeded. The Kursk's hull was brought to the surface and towed to Murmansk. The recovery of the crew was conducted inside the dry dock. The remains were returned to families for burial. This final accounting was possible because the Kursk was shallow enough to raise, and because the decision was made to do it. The men aboard the Thresher and the Scorpion, in water 10 to 30 times deeper, had no such accounting. The ocean kept them in a way it did not keep the Kursk. Running through the history of submarine losses is a thread that is harder to see than the engineering failures and the explosive events, but no less real. It is the thread of what governments chose not to say, and when, and to whom. The Soviet government did not acknowledge the loss of the K-129 for years. When the CIA's Project Azorian raised portions of the submarine and recovered the remains of 6 Soviet sailors, the Soviet government was not informed. The film of the burial at sea was made, classified, and kept. The sailors' families were not told where their husbands and fathers had been found and buried. They were told whatever the Soviet military told them, which was almost certainly not the truth. The Russian government's handling of the Kursk disaster follows the same pattern at a higher temperature. For the first 2 days after the sinking, official statements suggested the situation was under control. When it became clear that it was not, the statements became more guarded. The families who arrived at the naval base at Vidyayevo to demand information were given officials who deflected and delayed. One mother who became too agitated in a meeting with Navy officials was sedated by a nurse who entered the room and injected her with a tranquilizer in full view of other family members and journalists. The Argentine government's handling of the San Juan was, by comparison, relatively transparent. The search was conducted openly and internationally. The families were kept informed. The discovery and investigation were not classified. But the contrast reveals something. The submarine disasters of the Cold War were treated as military intelligence events as much as human tragedies. The machines and what they carried mattered to the governments that operated them in ways that competed with the obligation to the families of the men aboard. The ocean was a convenient keeper of secrets in this sense. It kept the machines at depths that prevented examination and the information that their contents might have provided from reaching the wrong hands. The wrecks at the bottom of the ocean are graves. They are also filing cabinets. The Cold War put things in the ocean, and the ocean has kept them, as it keeps everything, without explanation or apology. The secrecy that surrounds submarine operations is not incidental. It is the submarine's primary strategic value. A submarine whose position is known can be targeted. The entire operational logic depends on uncertainty. When a submarine is lost, this secrecy comes into conflict with the human obligations of the government that operated it. The Cold War resolution of this conflict was consistently to prioritize the secrecy. The families of lost crew members were told what could be safely told, which was generally less than they needed. The Soviet families of the K-129 crew never received a full account. The American families of the Scorpion crew received an inquiry result that said, in effect, "We probably know what happened, and we are not certain." The families of the Kursk crew received an official account, later contradicted by forensic evidence. The ocean held the evidence at depths governments could choose to access or not. It offered the physical record, but could not compel its own investigation. The compulsion to investigate had to come from families who consistently had less power than the governments with the ships and the classification authority. The wrecks on the seafloor are being changed, not quickly, but continuously, in the way that deep cold water changes everything it holds. The steel of the submarine hull is rusting. In the cold, low oxygen environment of the deep ocean, corrosion is slow but not absent. Microorganisms that metabolize iron are at work on the hulls, the way they are at work on every steel structure the ocean has been given. The Thresher's debris field has been accumulating a light sediment cover for more than 60 years. The Scorpion's hull, photographed at intervals over decades, shows progressive deterioration in the sections exposed to the water column. The pressure hull sections that were most intact in the first years after the loss are less intact now. What the ocean is doing is what it has always done with the hard things humans have put in it, accepting them, working on them, incorporating them at the pace of geological time. A submarine that has been on the seafloor for 60 years is in the early stages of this process. In another few hundred years, what remains will be less recognizable as a machine. In 1,000 years, it will be sediment and rust, and small amounts of minerals, and the memory of a shape that once held men. This is not loss in the way that loss is usually described. It is transformation. The ocean does not mourn what it takes. It does not distinguish between a submarine and a whale fall, and a layer of planktonic shells descending from the surface. It receives things and processes them, and adds them to itself. Everything that reaches the ocean floor eventually becomes part of the ocean floor. The men aboard the Thresher, and the Scorpion, and the Kursk, and the San Juan, and all the other submarines that have been lost, are in the ocean now, in the most literal sense. The elements of which they were made are in solution in the water around the wrecks. They are in the bodies of the creatures that feed there. They are in the sediment accumulating over the fragments of the machines they served. The ocean took them in. It kept them. It is making them into itself. The timeline of this transformation is not a human timeline. The submarines on the seafloor look different in photographs taken a decade apart. The difference is subtle. More encrustation, more burial at the hull edges, more marine growth on surfaces exposed to current. The process is real and continuous, but measured in centuries. The ocean is patient with what it is given. It does not rush the transformation of hard things. It applies the same processes it has applied to every hard thing it has received since the ocean formed. The submarines are part of this process now. They were designed to operate in the ocean. They are now, in a different sense, part of it. The ocean has incorporated them the way it incorporates everything, completely and without hurry, and without any record of what they once were. There is something the ocean offers to the people who have lost someone to it, though it does not offer this willingly or consciously or in any form that resembles comfort. It is simply a fact about the ocean, and those who can hold it tend to find it more sustaining than the alternatives. The ocean is not a cemetery in the sense that cemeteries are usually understood. A cemetery is a place of organized memory, marked stones, tended ground. The ocean is none of these things. It has no markers. It tends nothing. It keeps no record of what it has received, but it keeps what it receives, permanently and completely, and without distinction between the important and the unimportant. The steel of the Kursk's hull, and the titanium of the Komsomolets, and the aluminium alloys of the Thresher's reactor shielding are all in the water now, dispersed at different rates and at different distances from the wrecks, but in the water, in the currents, moving. The ocean does not hold things still. It circulates them. What it takes, it distributes, very slowly, through everything. This does not bring anyone back. It does not answer the questions that the inquiries left open. It does not resolve the mystery of the Scorpion, or return the 44 of the San Juan to the families who waited on the Argentine coast. The ocean offers none of those things, and makes no pretense of offering them. What it offers is this: the place where those people went is not a void. It is not an absence. It is one of the most complex and active and ancient environments on Earth. An environment that has been receiving things for 4 billion years and incorporating them and continuing. The men who went down in those submarines went somewhere. The place they went to is real and present and vast, and still doing what it has always done, indifferent to our grief, but not indifferent to them. It took them in. The ocean gives nothing away, but it keeps what it has, and it keeps it well, and it keeps it forever. That is not nothing. In the dark, at depth, it may be the only comfort that remains, and the ocean, which keeps its secrets without explanation and without apology, continues its long and ancient business far below the reach of any light. The submarines at the bottom of the ocean were machines of the Cold War, weapons designed for a world that no longer exists in the form it had when they went down. The men who crewed them went to sea in service of that competition. When the machines failed, they went down with them into a darkness that had nothing to do with Cold War strategy, or any of the categories that had given their service its context. The ocean is indifferent to these categories. It received the submarines and their crews the way it receives everything, without distinction and without preference. The missiles and the torpedoes and the reactors and the men are all equally subject to the same pressure, and the same cold, and the same slow dissolution. Whatever they were to the governments that sent them to sea, to the ocean, they are simply matter. There is always something deeper than the story we can reach. There is always something more than the inquiry can recover. And there is always still, in the cold and the dark and the silence of the ocean floor, a mystery that the wrecks embody and the water keeps, patient and indifferent and vast, waiting in the dark